Okay, are we ready to go? Excellent. Lights, camera, action, all that good stuff. You know, by the way, I'm Eric Engberg with Mindful Solutions. See, my monkey mind is already jumping around, and I was thinking about as we do this on camera, I purposely wanted to do it in high definition. I just thought it would look more professional if we did these with high definition cameras. And I'm a big Rolling Stones fanatic, and the last time I went to go see them, relatively recently, I've seen them over the years for several decades, and every tour, their light show and their stage and so on gets more amazing and more amazing. And now, these giant screens that are set up behind the stage, these just enormous things. And I was thinking about this when I was at the last show, and they did, and it's high def, right? I mean, it's pretty clear picture, despite the fact that the screen is so enormous. And the first shot they got of Keith Richards, and they pulled in really close to his face, I thought to myself, oh my God, I love you, Keith, but that's just a little too much. Let's pan out a little bit. And hopefully I'm not at the Keith Richards stage as far as being camera ready, but it does make you a little nervous. I don't know about how much weight it adds, but anyway. So I digress. Sorry about that. But it's a good lead-in for our topic, right? I think most of you probably signed up for this webinar because you've had some experience with having distracted thoughts, or what we call a monkey mind. And the great thing about this topic is everybody has it to some extent, right? Everybody deals with having distracted thoughts, and to the point that it can be problematic in terms of the work that we do and the leadership that we can provide for other people. So that's what we're gonna talk about today. And I'll just go through some of the topics that we're going to touch on in this webinar, and before we get started, so you know what we're going to be covering. What we do with Mindful Solutions is we look at leadership skills through a slightly different lens than you may be accustomed to from attending other self-development workshops or leadership development retreats or whatever you may have done in the past. Mindfulness is, and it's in all the papers. It's something that has been around for thousands of years, but in Western society particularly, it's a relatively new phenomenon in terms of the way we assimilate it into our work lives, and particularly our leadership skills. And so that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to learn a little bit about how to work with our monkey minds through that mindful lens, if you will. Mindfulness is, and this is true of all of the webinars, is really kind of the foundation that I use when I talk about leadership skills. And so I'll go through a definition of what mindfulness is, and you'll see as we go through the webinar how that kind of weaves through all the things that we talk about. I'll talk, obviously, we'll have to define what a monkey mind is. Some of us may have different interpretations of what that means than other folks. So we'll do that briefly, and I'll talk to you and share with you something that I use in almost all of my webinars, a model that I created that's called the space between model. And what that really is kind of a diagram of how our minds work. And what we do with particularly negative emotions, and how we handle those negative emotions. So if you haven't seen one of my webinars in the past, this will be new for you, and it's certainly the beginnings of starting to solve for dealing with and managing the monkey mind. You can't understand how to solve for monkey mind issues unless you understand what the effects of monkey mind are. So we'll go through those, and the monkey mind has a lot of effects on us, and some of them may be very plain and clear to you, and some of them probably less so, but it's certainly worth reviewing what they are. And then we'll get into some of the solutions, right? We'll talk more specifically about some of the things that we can do to manage our monkey minds and calm them down a little bit. Near the end, we'll just touch on the results. Mindless monkey minds, and I'll talk about this later, feed on themselves without practice of mindful solutions. And so the more we practice, the more we head towards positive results. So we'll talk about what kinds of things you can look forward to by practicing some of these skills. I'll give you some follow-up questions too, and you can take these back and personalize them for yourself. You can share them with your team if that's appropriate, and figure out how do these relate to my individual situation or my situation with my team. And then I'll give you a couple of practice exercises, kind of your own mindful self-development, if you were. And those are things, like the questions too, that you can take back and work through on your own, or share with your team. The more you practice with these skills, it's like anything else, whether it's playing the piano or being a good soccer player, you've got to practice these things in order for them to work. Okay? All right, let's get started, and as promised, let's talk a little bit about what is mindfulness. And so there's probably lots of definitions. If you Googled mindfulness, you'd probably find thousands and thousands. It used to be, just not that many years ago, there were not very many publications about mindfulness. And there are thousands today. And generally, the definition is going to look like what I'm going to share with you. And so let me go ahead and give that to you, and then we'll break it up and talk about it a little bit. So the definition that I use for mindfulness is purposely paying attention to the present moment without judgment. Okay? I'll repeat that. Purposely paying attention to the present moment without judgment. And so when you look at that definition, it's kind of it's meaty. It's got a lot of stuff in it. And so I'm going to break it into the 4 components that I think are important. The first one being the first word of the definition, which is purposely. So this is not something that just happens in the course of your daily life. In order to practice these skills, these solutions that I'm going to share with you, you've got to purposely do it. You have to say to yourself, okay, this is a situation where I can practice these solutions that are going to help me manage my monkey mind. The second part is paying attention. And you can see how a lot of these terms and words work together. So paying attention, and then the third one being to the present moment, right? So we're in our minds, and I'll talk more about our minds wandering and what the impact of that is. But the act of mindfulness is paying attention to what's going on right now. It's like focus. Daniel Goleman, who is the father of emotional intelligence, who I'm sure you've heard a lot about and maybe read his books. He talks about, he just wrote a book called Focus not too long ago, and it really is about kind of the foundation of that is paying attention in the present moment. And the last piece is the judgment piece. So we're going to pay attention, or purposely pay attention to the present moment without judgment. And this may be probably the component that is least talked about when it comes to mindfulness, but I consider it to be very important. And so that even gets divided into a couple of pieces. Without judgment, meaning that we don't beat ourselves up when we make mistakes, and we don't judge other people in their situations, whether it's making mistakes or just in the carrying out of their roles. I'm sure you may be, or you have people on your team who, like me, used to say, or do say today, that famous phrase of nobody is harder on themselves than I am. And we say that for a reason, right? We say that especially if our boss is reviewing some of maybe the mistakes that we made on a project or a piece of work that we were dealing with. And we use that as kind of a shield, don't we? To say, no matter what you tell me, trust me, I'm being harder on myself than you can possibly be on me. And I find that to be a dangerous phenomenon. Why do we have to beat ourselves up? Why do we have to judge ourselves so harshly? There isn't any reason to do that. And in fact, there's harm that is done when we beat ourselves up about our effort. We take that negative energy into whatever we do next. And that has a cumulative effect over time. We start having less self-confidence about our ability to do the work. And if we are doing it with other people, it starts to bring them down. It works on their stress levels in the wrong way, and they become less confident of their ability to do their work if they feel they're constantly being judged. So, so there's an early solution I'll throw out there right now. If you're somebody that uses that phrase, no one's harder on myself than I am, let's try to erase that. And if you hear other people saying it, you could possibly explain the same way of why that can be a damaging statement. Okay? So today we're going to learn how to better manage, not eliminate, and that's important, because we're not going to be able to eliminate the monkeys, right? So that would be a good movie title, or we're going to eliminate the monkeys. You can't get rid of distractions. Distractions and these thoughts that come into our heads, they don't ever stop. But what we're going to do is we're going to bring our attention to them, actually. Instead of pushing them away, we're going to take a look at what they're doing, how we're allowing that to happen, and figure out a better way to manage through that so that they don't have the negative impact, especially when we're trying to get work done. So let's talk about what is a monkey mind. Like I said earlier, people may have some different definitions of that. But very simply, the monkeys that I'm referring to are the thoughts that are in our minds that are competing for our attention. And you can probably think to yourself, how many times do you sit in a meeting where you really need to be paying attention to what's going on, and your mind is going to, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? Am I going to get to my kids' Little League game? Or other things having to do with work. I hope this meeting ends soon because I've got a lot of work to do, whatever the case may be. Those are all monkeys, right? And they're very unfocused, and they jump around when you least expect them to, and all of a sudden you say to yourself, what am I doing? I need to really be paying attention to what's going on. Even if you're not in a meeting, even if you're working on your own, that can happen too, right? Where you need to be focused on what you're doing, and it's just not working for you because your mind is racing, right? That's what people say. My mind is racing. It's going 1,000,000 miles an hour. Those are those monkeys that they seem like they're uncontrollable, and they're just jumping all over the place. The interesting thing about these thoughts, or these monkeys, is they really are, you could take these monkeys and take the thoughts and divide them into two categories, right? If you pay attention to where your mind goes when you are distracted, you are either thinking about something that's occurred in the past or something that may happen or will happen in the future, right? I mean, if you think about it, it only makes sense. If you're not in the present moment paying attention, you're either thinking about the past or the future. So you may be thinking about, maybe you had an argument with your spouse before you left for work this morning, and you're thinking about that. That's thinking in the past. Thinking in the future can be something like I mentioned earlier, I hope I can get out of here by 5 o'clock because I really like to get to my kid's Little League game. Okay? So that's, and the thing about those kinds of thoughts is as we get older, it gets worse. Not good news, right? Why is that? Well, it kind of makes sense when you think about it. The older you get, the more memories we have of the past, right? We've built them up over a long period of time, and so there's more material from which to draw, right? Our distractions become based on some of these events that have taken place in the past. There's more of it now. We also dream more about the future, right? We start looking forward to things that are going to happen in the future. And it can be short-term, like getting to your kid's Little League game, or it could be looking forward to retirement, you know, in that beach house you so desperately want to go live in. So there's an awful lot of stuff to distract us, whether it's, you know, future or past thought. We also worry a lot, don't we? It seems like today people worry more than they ever have. And I don't know whether it's the economy being lousy or the fear of you know, job loss or whatever the situation is. There's just, you know, if you think about it, certainly my generation, I was you know, I was turned loose and I had a mile walk to school or something like that. No one thought twice about that. Today, you would never send your kid out, you know, your elementary school kid out to walk to school for a mile by themselves. And so now parents worry about things that didn't exist. I know my parents didn't worry about the possibility of gun violence in my neighborhood, and there certainly seems to be an awful lot more of that, excuse me, today. And so there's a lot more worrying about stuff, whether it has to do with our kids, maybe we're caregivers of elderly parents, maybe it's our financial situation, especially that now that certainly in the middle class we seem to be kind of stuck and we're not realizing the dreams that we thought we would be able to realize. And like I said, we fantasize too, right? We fantasize about where we're going to be. That's an example of future thought. You know, where we're going to be tonight, where we're going to be when we go on vacation, where we're going to be when we're much older. So the bottom line is there's so many wells from which to draw these distractions, these monkeys, these thoughts that take us away from paying attention in the present moment. The loudest monkey, if you will, is fear, right? So I talk a lot about peeling the layers of the onion back, and a lot of emotions, particularly negative emotions, like anger as an example, and I talk about this in another webinar. When you pull back the anger layer on the onion, what you'll find behind it is fear. And fear is the basis of a lot of the monkeys that are jumping around in our minds. And what, you know, we think about things that we need to be wary of. And this kind of goes to the worrying part that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So what do we worry about, right? We worry about things outside of ourselves. We worry about other people and what they're going to do and the effect that they're going to have on our lives or other people's lives. We worry about situations or things that we don't have control over, right? I mean, it's one thing to worry about something that we've got control over because we can go out and fix that, right? We can go out and do something about it. But if it's something that is outside of our control, then we have a tendency to be afraid of what's going to occur with whatever that might be. We also get wary of conflicting opinions, and I think this is more true today than it's ever been. We seem very entrenched in our own opinions. We don't do as good a job, I think, as we could in opening our minds up to other possibilities. This is certainly true in the political arena, and I think it's true in others as well. We don't do well. We get afraid, I think, sometimes of others' opinions and what it would mean if we shifted from point A to point B on a particular topic? Do you look weak if you change your mind about something? Of course, the answer is no, but those are the kinds of things that we worry about. But the thing that we worry about most, and I think this is more true today than it's ever been, is our future. We really are concerned about things like, am I going to have enough money to retire? How am I going to pay off my student loan? Am I going to be able to hold on to my job long enough? What if I get sick? Those kinds of things we worry about a tremendous amount. And there's real fear. Think of that screaming monkey. The biggest screaming, loudest screaming monkey is the fear about our future. We also have fear about things that can go wrong. And like I mentioned, not having enough money to do things is a big one now, given that we've recently come out of a terrible recession. I think people, I read a study not too long ago that showed that people who are working today have a higher degree of fear and stress about losing their jobs than people who are unemployed in terms of their future. So people who have employment, are making money, are more worried about the future than people who are unemployed. That's pretty scary, isn't it, when you think about it? That's a lot of stress to be carrying around, and it certainly didn't used to be that way, but today's economic climate has certainly driven that to a great extent. The same thing with our health, too. We get, that's something that we can't necessarily anticipate going wrong, speaking of things that are outside of our control. A personal example for me is when I was in my early 40s, I had to have both of my hips replaced as a result of a disease I had in them. And I didn't anticipate that. No, I didn't see that coming at all. There wasn't anything that I did that caused this disease that forced me to have to get my hips replaced. And that was a big change in my life at the time. It was a big disruption in my life. And so worrying about, and I certainly remember back then how worried I was about how that was going to affect my ability to provide for my family. Would I be able to continue to do the work that I was doing at the time? And if not, what was I going to be able to do going forward? So the last one I'll share with you, and I think this can be an elephant in the room for a lot of people. A lot of people don't want to face this, or certainly don't want to admit it out loud. But sometimes we can be very afraid, and the monkey that jumps around, kind of the sneaky monkey, if you will, is being exposed as a fraud, right? That somehow someone thinks that you're smarter than you are, or that you're better at your job than you think you are, and you are concerned about being revealed as a fraud, and somehow that's going to affect your job security, as it were. So that's got a lot of tentacles that we won't go into, but certainly there's fear there, and I just wanted to point that out as an example of one of the monkeys that we have to deal with. So one of the very cool things about mindfulness is that in the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, but mostly in the last 5 years, there's been a tremendous amount of research around the impact of mindfulness on the brain, and just on the brain in general. And so there's lots of understanding now, instead of just theorizing, about how our minds work when they're dealing with emotions. And so one of the things that we know is that the default switch that we've got in our brains is to have these monkeys jumping around with regard to different thoughts whether they're from the past or the future or whatever, it's not just one distraction at a time, right? If you think about it, when you get distracted, you probably get distracted by multiple things. And so the mental image, if you want to get it, is the monkeys all kind of swinging around from branch to branch and trying to compete for your attention. And so what we do in those moments is that we tend to, and again, proven out through research, we relive the happy times with joy and the sad ones with fear, as an example. You know, those kinds of things naturally take place in the brain, and most importantly, like I said, that's the default. That's what we're honestly going to be working against in this mindful solutions model. Our egos, another fascinating topic for another time perhaps, but our egos are very dependent on these monkeys, on these thoughts. The ego, we throw that word around a lot when we're talking about this person has a big ego, for example. What our ego is that it's a function of our attachment to the thoughts that we're talking about, these monkeys, right? So when we attach ourselves to these worries that we have, these concerns that we have that are distracting us from the present moment, that's our ego's attachment to that concern, that fear, and we're not able to pull away from that ego and really focus on what we need to do. But with mindful thinking, and you'll see this as we go through some of the solutions, as we practice mindful thinking, that ego is sacrificed for, we'll call it the greater good, for peace of mind, for, I won't say non-attachment, but I'll say less attachment to those monkeys. And actually, one of the things that comes, a very cool piece that comes out of the research is the more we practice mindful leadership skills, the more compassion we end up showing to other people. And that's always a good thing, whether it's at work or anywhere else. Another biological piece that I find very fascinating is that the average time span of an emotion is 90 seconds. So think about that for a second. When you experience an emotion, whether it's anger or fear or any other emotion, the time it takes to sense whatever the event is that's going to create the emotion, okay, for the brain to process that event and for the stress hormones to flush out of our system, right, that create that emotion, that only takes 90 seconds. However, rarely do we work through negative emotions that quickly, right? So when you get, if you have an argument with somebody at work, you're not usually over it in 90 seconds. And that's because of the attachment that we bring to that situation. So it's things like, I wonder if that person's going to hold that event against me down the road. Let's say you have the argument with your boss. Is this going to affect my evaluation down the road? Or is it going to affect my raise? Or whatever. The ego attaches to those things that we're wary of, and those are monkeys, right? Those are thoughts that are jumping around that cause this situation to last more than a minute and a half. And you can probably think of any emotion from something simple, like being frustrated in traffic, right, to just the grieving process that you work through with the death of a loved one. Obviously, that's not a 90-second process. That's days and weeks and months sometimes, and so that a delta between how long it takes biologically, the 90 seconds, and the time it takes for that emotion to really start to subside, all of that space between is something that's manageable by us. So those are the monkeys that are attaching and swinging and jumping and screaming and so on. Those thoughts are things that we can respond to in a more mindful way. And we're going to talk about that. So, for example, some of the types of mindless monkeys that go with fear or anxiety or other emotions, we use things like what I'll call extreme descriptors. So we have a habit of saying things like, she always says that I do such and such and so and so, or he never gets his work on time. Always, never. It's having to go through these reports is just horrible. So no, those words are. I think of language I think of a lot of things on a continuum, but language being one of them. And most of the time, when we're describing our emotions, how things are making us feel, we tend to shoot to these extremes: the always, the never, the horrible, terrible, awful. These words that really overblow the situation. And so that's one of the ways that we manifest, excuse me, that we manifest this fear or this anger or whatever the emotion can be. Another thing that we do is, excuse me, 1 second. Another thing that we do is we tend to, again, on that continuum of pessimism and optimism, we tend, and maybe this is a function or can be a function of judging ourselves and really kind of eroding our self-confidence over time, we tend to become more pessimistic thinkers, right? You know, people who are just Debbie Downers about seemingly everything, right? That's that glass half empty kind of thinking that goes along with that repetitive monkey attachments that take place in our minds. Another example of this is what I call profiteering, and that's P-R-O-P-H-E-T, that kind of profiteering. So have you ever had this situation where somebody says, well, I've got faith that we're going to get this project done on time. I sure hope that the boss is in a good mood today. Taken on its own, those are not helpful statements. Those are not helpful words, hope and faith by themselves, right? So it's one thing to hope that you get this project done on time. Hope alone is not going to make it happen. Faith by itself is not going to make something happen. Hope and hard work, faith and setting goals and meeting them, those are the kinds of things that can help move us forward. But by themselves, being a prophet and saying, I have faith that this is all going to work out okay, certainly in a work setting does not happen. We're our own worst enemies, and I know I keep going back to judgment, and when I did the definition of mindfulness, I said that it was kind of underplayed, and so I'm going the other way with this. We become our own worst enemies when we beat ourselves up and kind of wear ourselves down. I encourage you to, if you have a chance, I have a video on YouTube about the neurology part of mindful solutions. And it talks about, in our brains, we have what are called telomeres. They're the ends of chromosomes which literally protect us. They're like helmets, if you will, protect us from stress. And over time, they wear down. And so we become less equipped, less able to handle stress as well. Things that didn't used to bother us now bother us. And one of the ways that we wear down these telomeres that protect us from those stressors is by beating ourselves up. So why do that, right? It doesn't make any sense. We're not getting anywhere by being our own worst enemy. Part and parcel of that is this kind of ego-driven blaming, where, if somebody says something that you perceive as negative about you, you've just gone through an evaluation with your boss and they've shared with you some recommendations about how you can improve your performance. There are a lot of ways that you can take that information in. One of them is to say, okay, so he gave me a lot of compliments, and I'm going to continue to, show strength in those areas. And he shared with me some opportunities that I've got to improve my performance, and I'm going to work on those too. That's one option. The other option, and again, I'm talking about, two ends of the continuum here, is to go to that place of not accepting accountability, pushing that away from ourselves and saying, I don't deserve to be treated like that. You ever heard that from a direct report? I just don't deserve to be treated like that. That's somebody that's not willing to accept accountability. That's somebody that's pushing it away. And it's usually, again, when you peel that layer back, they sound angry, but they're afraid. There is real fear there of confronting some of the things that they know that they probably, and it may be unconscious, but know that they need to do better. And so that's something that we'll talk about in a little bit in terms of kind of self-analysis stuff. But right now, what I think is important to do is to kind of share my space between model, because it really does give us an idea of what happens when those monkeys are jumping around and distracting us from what needs to be done and the emotions that they create. So in the space between model, what you see is at the top of the model is this stressor emotion, whatever that might be. So we'll use fear as an example. So we're nervous about a meeting that we've got this afternoon, okay? And that's something that's distracting us from what we need to be working on right now. So that's the monkey. The monkey is fear, right? So in that moment, we recognize, hey, I'm trying to get my work done here, and I'm distracted by this monkey who wants me to worry about this afternoon's meeting. So in that, and I call that space between, in that moment in our minds, we have the ability, through practicing mindfulness, of paying attention to that moment, in that space between, right? Let's go back to that definition. We're going to pay attention in this present moment to how we're feeling. We recognize this monkey of fear, and we're noticing it, and we're noticing that it's drawing us away from the work that we need to be completing. And at this point, we can go one of two ways. Most of the time, and our default, as I was talking about earlier, our default is to react to that monkey, to not think about it, but we react. And we have, we have physical manifestations of that. We have behavioral manifestations of that. So physical manifestations can be lots of things. You clench your fists, you tighten your muscles, you might get a headache. Those are all physical manifestations. Behavioral manifestations, maybe you're somebody that you yell, or you slam doors, or pound your fist on the table. Those are reactions, right? There's almost no thinking involved. When we feel these negative emotions, we react to them. That's what most of us do. We don't even think about it. And we may regret it afterwards because we didn't give it any thought. We just acted. What mindfulness does is it develops these skills, if you will, to pay attention instead of going to that mindless reaction, to make a choice in that space between and to say, I know that I don't like any of those reactions. I don't like feeling tense. I don't like slamming doors. I don't like it when I yell. Those kinds of reactions aren't making me a better leader. They're not helping me. They're not helping my team. What can I do differently? And so that choice in the space between is to come up with a more mindful response. right? That's where the mindful solutions are. So let's talk about some of the effects of the monkey mind. You know, in order to, like I said at the beginning of the webinar, in order to come up with the most targeted and mindful solutions, we've got to understand what the effects of the monkey mind are. I'm sorry, I don't know why my throat is like this today. All right. So our ability to focus on the present moment tends to be sacrificed, as we've talked about, to past and future thinking. And here's the effect of that. When you are distracted, and this is a piece of research that goes along with this, when we are distracted, when we're trying to get a task completed, and we have these past and future thoughts, these monkeys jumping around, it takes us 25% longer to accomplish that task. 25% longer to accomplish that task. So think about that. If it's a task that lasts an hour, normally it's going to take you an hour and a quarter. If it's a task that takes a week, now you're talking about big time, right? Instead of 40 hours, you know, it's 75, or I'm probably doing the math wrong, but you know, it's a lot more time to get a task accomplished because of these monkeys that are occupying our minds. And you know what's really frustrating about that is that the harder, I know you know this is true, the harder we try to focus and ignore those monkeys, the worse it gets, right? It's like these monkeys that makes them want to play even more. And then we start judging ourselves, right? We get more frustrated. It's kind of like that, you know, if you've ever dealt with this insomnia and you're laying in bed and you're like, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep, and that just makes it worse, right? You're putting more stress on yourself to get something done, and it's not working, and you're just creating more. Boy, if I don't get to sleep, if I don't get at least 6 hours tonight, then I'm going to be tired, and I got to do this presentation at 8 a.m., and blah, 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 right? Monkeys are flying everywhere. So the more we try to push the monkeys away, the less successful we are. And so we're going to talk about a strategy where we pay attention to those monkeys rather than try to ignore them. Another effect of the monkey mind is that it really stifles creative thought. You know, our brains are wired to be safe, to stay safe, and creativity and change are like kryptonite to monkeys. They hate that. You know, the monkey mind labels creative ideas as being stupid, and you know, the monkeys get scared, if you will, of change, and that's why we don't like change. It scares us. It's different. It's outside of our comfort zones. So when someone, you know, when the boss comes in and says, I know that you've been doing this task this way for the last couple of years, but we've discovered a more efficient and effective way of doing this task, and we're all gonna get trained in this new way. That's a change, and we get very nervous about change. And what if I'm not able to perform this new way of doing things? I was doing okay. Everything was all right with the old way, and now you're going to change it, and now I'm starting to worry. So those are monkeys that are jumping around, especially when you're trying to learn a new task or learn what this change is going to be, instead of being really focused in on that. Your mind, the monkeys in your mind are going to, what if, right? Like these things that you think you don't have any control over. So, another part of what monkey minds do is that they create arbitrary goals for us. They set up, in our minds we start saying things like, today I'm going to get everything on my to-do list done, and I'm going to get it done before 5 o'clock so I can go home on time. Okay? How does that usually work out for you? To-do lists are the most frustrating things in the world, right? We have a wonderful tendency, and I'm being cynical here, a wonderful tendency to think that we can do more than what we really can do. Now, some of it, because of these distractions, these monkeys, like I said, it takes 25% more time when we're distracted. And so when we make our to-do list, logically we think, well, I can knock this out in an hour, and this meeting's 2 hours, and then all of a sudden, you know, the first thing on the list is taking an hour and a half, and it's blown up your whole to-do list. And so the monkeys punish us when we don't meet those deadlines. And what happens? We beat ourselves up, right? Again, back to that judgment piece. And again, it wears down the telomeres in our brains, and the stress gets worse, and we don't handle that very well. The monkeys very rarely reward us for positive accomplishments. And so, you know, one of the biggest opportunities for most people in leadership roles is to reward or congratulate or even just acknowledge work that's done well by other people, and even by ourselves too, right? We say sometimes, well, that's what they get paid to do. And that's a very old school kind of thing to do, and that's not what folks today are looking for. So because we don't necessarily reward ourselves for our accomplishments, we don't do it very well with other people too. So it's something to keep in the back of our minds that when we do things well, we need to acknowledge that. And especially if we've got folks that look up to us as managers, as leaders, and give them props when they do well too. I think I mentioned this earlier. These mindless monkeys feed on themselves. No, I don't mean it that way, but they reinforce negative behaviors. And the only way to change that is to practice these mindful skills that we're going to go over. And as a result, we're going to, you know, these monkeys are so antagonistic. What we want to do is to slow those monkeys down, and so that we can have a more peaceful, less distracted existence. And if we can do that, then the time that we waste while our monkeys are distracting us will lessen. And so that's good news, right? We do have the ability to choose not to be enslaved by these monkeys in our minds. These are things that are under our control, right? If you're somebody who says, I'm just one of those people that's distracted, I can't help it, that's just the way I am, that's what my DNA is. Not true. You have the ability, and now we know it neurologically too, that you can, by practicing some of these skills, you can actually change that. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Eckhart Tolle. He's a guy that Oprah's really big on Eckhart Tolle, and he's a very bright guy, and he works with mindfulness and really trains a lot of, not just leaders, but everybody on how to approach their lives in a healthier way. And so he had a quote that I wanted to share with you that has to do with our monkey minds. And he said, "Not to be able to stop thinking is a dreadful affliction, but we don't realize this because almost everyone is suffering from it, so it's considered normal. This incessant mental noise prevents you from finding that realm of inner stillness that's inseparable from being." So, like I said at the beginning of the webinar, this is not something that just crops up in people every once in a while. This is something we all deal with. We all have to manage our monkeys, and we do it with varying degrees of success. Some days we're good at it, some days not so good at it. And by practicing some of these skills we're going to talk about, the easier it's going to be. We become, as leaders, I was talking about these goals that our monkey minds create for ourselves, right? Getting through the to-do list and getting out before 5 o'clock. One of the things that happens is we start to focus more on our own personal, even though they're work-related, the personal expectations that we've got, getting through that to-do list and getting out by 5. but we do it at the expense of organizational goals. And as a result, we tend to forget, so I'm an important part of this machine, if you will, this organizational machine, and if I don't do what I'm supposed to do and others don't do what they're supposed to do, it's not going to work the way it needs to. There are reasons that there are things like mission statements and value statements that and visions for the company and how to move forward, but if we're more focused on how am I going to get through my to-do list today, and then subsequently get frustrated when you inevitably don't, what we tend to do in those situations is we stop taking risks, right? We instead of taking risks that really move organizations forward, especially in leadership, we're expected to kind of, the old worn out phrase of thinking outside the box, we're expected as leaders to think about and come up with ideas that are going to help us meet the needs of our customers, regardless of who they are, in a creative, different kind of way. If we get so focused on getting out by 5 or getting through my to-do list, we're really not fulfilling the role as it's been designed for us. So these monkeys love distractions, and because they have this ability to jump from tree to tree, when we are trying to be in the present moment and pay attention to what we're doing, at work there are a million distractions. And so these monkeys manifest themselves as things like trying to work on something and the email preview screen comes up. Okay, quick little easy solution. Turn that thing off. It's such a monkey, right? Oh my God, it's such a monkey. If you got your computer on and you're looking through a spreadsheet or doing whatever it is that you do on the computer, and an email comes up, especially if it's from your boss, even if you don't open it up and read the whole thing, it's there. That monkey's going, hey, pay attention to me. You're thinking about what's in there. Is he expecting me to respond right away, et cetera, et cetera. Turn that thing off, and what you can say when somebody if people are accustomed to you responding to their emails right away, and all of a sudden you stop doing that, there are a couple of things that you can do. One is to let people know, I'm really not getting my work done like I could be, and so I'm turning off email preview. And it's not that I'm not reading your email, I am, but I'm only doing it at specific times, right? And if your boss comes to you, especially, and says, usually when you respond to email right away and then you stop doing that, people will come and say, hey, did you get my email? Or they'll send you another email to say, hadn't heard from you. Did you get my first email? Let them know. And there's a way to do this, right? Go to that person, even if it's your boss, and say, I'm really trying to improve the way, I notice I get distracted a lot when I'm trying to focus on a particular project, if I'm doing it for you or somebody else, for our customers. And so one of the things that's distracting me and causing me to make mistakes or causing me to not get my work done on time is things like email. And so I just wanted to let you know that one of the things that I'm doing is I'm turning off preview. And if you need me in an emergency, come let me know, right? But you need to know that I'm not going to be checking email while I'm trying to focus on other things. If they understand that you're doing this for the greater good, right, to try to make the organization better, they're going to understand, and that's going to make sense. Same thing with like Facebook. Turn Facebook off when you're at work. If you've got access to it, check it during breaks, check it during lunch hours so that you can, put that aside and make it less of an issue. But again, let people know that that's what you're going to be doing so there aren't any surprises. I'm sure you can think of a lot of other examples. I know I worked in I ran a call center, and one of the better ideas that I saw was when one of my managers, who worked in a cubicle that was surrounded by cubicles of people that reported to that manager, if that manager was trying to get something done that required not being interrupted, we encourage people to go to the manager if they've got questions and if they need help, but there are things that manager needed to do where they couldn't be distracted. And so one of my managers figured out a way that they had a flag on their cubicle, a red flag. And so when they were on, let's say, on a conference call that they really needed to pay attention to, they'd put this red flag up so that nobody would interrupt them. It's amazing. People who can see that you're on a phone call will still walk up to you and say, "Am I bothering you? Do you have a minute? Can I talk to you about?" So depending on what your situation is, you may have to do something a little bit more, desperate than that. But you do have a responsibility to let people know that you're trying to solve for this distraction issue, okay? One of the biggest monkeys, right, and we do this because of fear, is multitasking. Now, multitasking, especially in this economy, in a lot of places, has been seen as a positive. I've seen workshops advertised on how to make you a better multitasker. And I'm here to tell you, it is the #1 evil in business today. And now there's research to back that up, that we think we're getting more done when we are multitasking, and in fact, we're getting less accomplished. Our monkey minds, when we multitask, are splitting our focus between the task that we're trying to get done at hand and other distracted thoughts. And so, let's go back to the situation where you're working on a project and you're looking at your computer screen and an email comes up. You haven't turned off your preview, and you see it and you say, "Oh, I can knock that out real quick," or "Oh, I needed to get that done today too." And you stop what you're doing and then you go and you do something else. But now you're thinking about what you left behind. And when I got to get back to that. And so maybe while you're trying to accomplish what was in the email, you're not doing a good job of it, or you're not doing it as quickly as you ordinarily would if you didn't have the original task in your brain distracting you. So now the original task becomes a monkey. And so then you move back to the original task and the email becomes the monkey. See what I mean? And sometimes we have multiple monkeys that are jumping around. And so there's lots of stuff going on with multitasking that makes us less efficient at what we do. The research shows that there's actually a negative efficiency and effectiveness amongst multitaskers. What the research also tells us is that multitaskers are constantly distracted, and they have a very they tend to have a more disorganized memory. They'll forget when things are due, or they will, in recounting a conversation, they will say, "So-and-so said such and such, and it wasn't that person at all, it was someone else who said that." Or maybe they said something different than what you're remembering. So multitaskers don't focus very well. They can't concentrate on one thing at a time very well. And so they have these disorganized memories. And they're also worse at analytic thought, right? Analytic reasoning, which makes sense because analytic thought and reasoning takes time. It takes real focus. And if we're constantly being distracted or trying to do more than one thing at a time, we're not very good at doing analysis. And then there's my favorite statistic of all when it comes to multitasking. And it says that multitaskers have a decreased IQ that's 2 times greater than marijuana smokers. Okay, so I don't know what your experience is, but when I think about the IQ of somebody who's high, yeah, and to think that the IQ of a multitasker would be twice as bad as that should be really scary to you. It's certainly very scary to me. So, most people that I know, when they're high, they walk into a room and forget why they're there, right? That's not something that you need when you're trying to be effective and efficient at work. Some other side effects of multitasking: it's easier to get frustrated, angry, anxious, because you're trying to get multiple things done at the same time. And if you're interrupted, what happens? You get angry. As you start to realize, I'm just jumping around here and I got lots of plates spinning in the air, but I'm dropping them. I'm not getting them done. They're breaking. I start to get more frustrated. I get anxious that, oh my God, I thought I would be able to get this, knock this out on time, and I'm not. And so there's that real anxiety about that situation. Think about that space between model, and so we have these poorly thought out reactions to situations, right? Multitaskers have a greater tendency to just go to that mindless reaction part of the space between model, where they yell, or they slam doors, or they start feeling physically sick when things aren't working out right. So if you're somebody that multitasks, really consider what some of your options are. Think about, be aware of those times when you're multitasking and you start to feel that frustration, you start to feel that anger, and say to yourself, oh, it's because I'm multitasking. I did a workshop on, just on multitasking, and, I asked a group, and this was pretty typical of the responses that I got. I would ask, so when is it okay to multitask? And the typical response was, well, it's okay to put on music while you're cleaning your house, right? Or it's okay to pay your bills while you're watching a golf tournament on TV. And there was general agreement. So if you go to a continuum way of thinking, right? It's okay probably to pay your bills and watch a golf tournament on TV. That's maybe be at one end of the continuum, and at the other end of the continuum, it's not okay to pay your bills while you're driving to work. And then there's all of these spaces, these choices in between. There's an infinite number of options in between. I mean, let's face it, right? The best way to listen to music is not while you're doing something else. It's if you have the opportunity to just take your iPod and put the buds in your ear, close your eyes, lay back, and just listen to the music. Now, we don't always have the opportunity to do that. We usually listen to music while we do other things. But I think you'd agree, that's the best way to really experience the music that you want to listen to. But the farther you get away from that ideal situation, the more you have to start asking yourself the question, am I doing more harm than good by multitasking here? Because we're going to move more, as we do that, we move more towards these mindless reactions. The other thing that we tend to do, especially as leaders, is we tend to not think through decisions very well, right? If we're being distracted because we're multitasking, we've got all these things we're trying to do, and we're put in a position where we have to make a decision, speed becomes the overwhelming force. That's the monkey that's driving us at that point. And so we tend to really just kind of shoot from the hip when it comes to decision making. And I think we all know that that's not the best way to do it. We really need to put more thought and analysis into that. All right. So we understand the effects of all of this. Enough about that. Let's get into what are some of the real solutions to deal with these monkeys. The first thing is, so why is mindfulness important in terms of coming up with solutions? And I've shared some of those with you already, because we are going to focus on the present moment, right? We're going to pay attention to what we need to be doing and manage these distractions. What mindfulness will let us do is stop the monkey, and instead of trying to push the monkey away, we want to bring the monkey in and have a conversation with the monkey, all right? And what we're going to do by having that conversation with the monkey is to disempower the monkey, right? So what I mean by that is if we, in that space between moment, if we learn to recognize that that monkey is in the picture, that it is distracting us from what we need to be doing in the present moment, that disempowers the monkey. We say to it, oh, yep, I caught myself, I'm being distracted by whatever the case may be. Then we're better able to say, okay, can't do that, let me put that aside and get back to what I was focusing on, right? As opposed to just letting the monkey swing around from tree to tree. We want to bring that monkey in, recognize that monkey, and then by disempowering it, by recognizing it and having that conversation, say, you know, you're not going to bother me. I need to stay focused and push that monkey to the side. The first steps in doing this is to practice paying attention to what you're thinking about. Now, there was a study done not too long ago, and so modern technology made this a wonderful experience. What these researchers did, they wanted to see what people were thinking in any given moment of their waking lives. And so they gave them smartphones with, and they would ring the smartphones at different times, so you couldn't predict when the phone was going to go off. And at that point, the research subjects had to, in that moment, check themselves and think about what they were thinking about. They needed to pay attention to what they were thinking about. Were they in the present moment doing whatever they needed to do, or were they thinking about the past? Were they thinking about the future? What were the emotions? That was the other question that the researchers were looking at. So what emotion, when the phone went off, what emotions were you feeling? You can do the same thing, right? And you can certainly set your phone to go off at different times if you want to do that. But most importantly, just pay attention in that space between of how you're feeling at different points of the day. What are you thinking about? What's that monkey doing? Are you thinking about something that occurred in the past? Are you thinking about something that may occur in the future? How is that? What are you feeling about that? Are you anxious? Are you sad? Are you afraid? Are you resentful? What are the emotions? And check yourself on those. One of the things that I like to do sometimes is, and then this is mindfulness practice, right? I'll say, today, every time I see the color red, that's going to be my cue to stop and check myself and say, so what am I thinking about right now? Am I thinking about the past? Am I thinking about the future? And by the way, I learned from doing this that I'm much more of a future thinker. You may find that you are too, or you may find, and there's not one that's better than another. The important thing is recognizing it in the moment that, hey, I'm thinking about what would be good at dinner rather than what I really need to be paying attention to right now, okay? I know a lot of other people, one of the things they do, and you can do this too, is doorways. So every time, and this is good especially at work, because usually when you go through a doorway, you're starting another piece of work that you need to do that day. So, you know, you walk into somebody's office, that's a great time to say to yourself, okay, I need to pay attention to this meeting I'm about to attend and not think about so on and so forth. But whatever works for you, try to pay attention, and it only needs to be maybe a couple of times a day if you want to just start. And the more you start doing that, paying attention to those monkeys that are going on, the more you start to change, literally rewire your brain and push those monkeys aside and really focus on the present moment. Notice too, when you think about, let's say you're thinking about the past, something that happened before. Let's say there was horrible traffic and you were late to work because of that, and that's distracting you right now. Is that positive or negative? That's negative, right? But that's something else to keep track of. And then label the emotion, like I said. So track this, right? Track your tendencies, and then dissect each of these monkeys. Okay, maybe that's a little too disgusting, but I think you know what I mean. When does this monkey, you know, when you feel fear, let's just use that emotion as an example. When you feel fear, when does that monkey show up? When fear distracts you, does that show up mostly at work? Does it show up at home? Does it show up when you're with your boss? Does it show up when you're leading your team in a meeting? When does that occur? Maybe it's all of the above. As you pay attention to, I feel fear in these situations, I feel anger in these situations, just paying attention to those monkeys starts to disempower them a little bit. Work the monkey's emotions through that space between model, right? So when you're thinking about this stuff, if you're feeling angry, say, oh, okay, so normally in this situation, I would yell, okay? But I'm aware that that's what I would normally do, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to choose something else. So pay attention to how you've reacted in the past to that emotion and ask yourself, what are some of the healthier responses to that emotion? Let me give you an example. Let's say that I have to have a difficult conversation this afternoon with one of my direct reports, and I'm worried about it. It's distracting me from what I need to be doing right now, okay? So first of all, it's a future thought, right? So we'll label that, it's a future thought. And by labeling, I'm saying this is the part where we bring the monkey in. Okay, monkey, you're a future thought. And is worrying about that difficult conversation positive or negative? No, it's negative, right? And what's the emotion? Well, it's fear, right? I'm worrying about this difficult conversation I'm going to have with this direct report. So I've now given it 3 labels. It's fear, it's a future monkey, and it's a negative monkey. And what are my manifestations for fear? So you take it to the next level. So you're still in that space between, and you're asking yourself, so what do I normally do when I am distracted by this kind of thing? Well, physically, the way it manifests physically for me is I get a nervous stomach, right? I can just feel, oh God, I've got this meeting with this direct report, and I'm really worried about how it's going to go because I don't have a whole lot of good news to share with them, and you start feeling it in your stomach. That's me. That's the way I experience it. Maybe you experience it differently, but pay attention to whatever that physical manifestation would be. Perhaps it manifests itself behaviorally as well, or instead of. I know that certainly in the past, when I'm confronted with that kind of fear, I tend to avoid the situation. So I'll postpone it. So maybe it's scheduled for this afternoon, and gee, all of a sudden I've got a conflict. And so, hey, can we do this tomorrow, kind of thing, which doesn't make it better. It makes the whole thing worse. Not only for the person that you need to have the conversation with, but for you, because now you've just added 24 hours to worry about how that's going to go, right? So if you pay attention in that space between about how your fear manifests, then you can say to yourself, all right, so I'm not going to postpone it. That's something that I would have done in the past. I'm not going to do that. I need to confront this head on. What can I do to make this feel better? Because these negative emotions are not helping me. They're not helping me work towards the organizational goals, let alone my personal goals. So what are my more mindful responses? Instead of these mindless reactions, what are my more mindful responses? And so, for example, why am I nervous about having this difficult conversation? Maybe it's I'm not sure, I think I know what I'm going to say, but I'm not sure how this person's going to react to what I have to say. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to one of my other managers or maybe even my boss and say, listen, I've got this difficult conversation with one of my direct reports this afternoon. Do you have 15 minutes where we can sit down and just role play it with me? You can be the employee and I'll be me, and we'll just role play it, and I'd be really interested in your feedback on what I think I'm going to do and what I think I'm going to say to this person, and help me out that way. So if that goes well, as it should, what's that going to do? Right? It deals with that monkey head on. It gives you a more mindful response to take into that situation. And if you have that kind of confidence now that it's going to go better than what you thought it was going to be, the physical manifestation starts to go away a little bit, right? You're less likely to postpone that meeting. So things that what was a negative emotion now turns into this positive feeling of confidence going forward. Hope that makes sense. Try it with, think of an example for yourself and sit with that space between model and run through it for something that you are dealing with. Multitasking, let's see if we can solve a little bit for multitasking, since I labeled it the evildoer of this, right? Multitasking, again, I've got YouTube videos on this, and I encourage you to watch those. They're obviously free. Multitasking is kind of an oxymoron, if you will, because you're not able, nobody really multitasks, do they? I mean, they're either focused on one thing or they're focused on another thing. The multitasking part is the distraction. You're not really doing anything except worrying about this distraction, and so you jump from what you're doing, like I said, to address the thing that's worrying you. And now you're dealing with that, but you're being distracted over here. So if we're gonna multitask, let's do this in a mindful way, okay? It's essentially, let's say you've got a couple of things, that you're dealing with, this project that you originally wanted to work on and responding to this email. Instead of jumping back and forth, the way to handle those situations is to focus on one task for a set amount of time and tell yourself, I'm going to focus on this. Now, this other thing's got me distracted and it's got me worried, and so I don't want to say, all right, I'm going to work on this for an hour and then I'll go deal with this email. Because you may not be able to last an hour because you're too distracted by the email you need to respond to or think you need to respond to. And so you say, all right, I'm going to work on this hardcore for 20 minutes, no interruptions, no distractions. I'm just pedal to the metal. I'm going to work on this for 20. I may not get it done in 20 minutes, but at least I'm going to put in 20 minutes of hard work on what I need to do here. And then I'm going to go look at this email, and I'm going to spend 10 minutes. And then maybe that's all I need is 10 minutes to respond. But while I'm doing that, I'm not going to think about what's going on over here. But very mindfully, you start setting aside time and say, I'm going to do one task at a time. No matter how brief that time is, you're setting it up in your mind so that you don't think that you're trying to do two things at once. You're doing one thing, and then you do one thing, okay? Even in that situation where you've done it and you notice these distractions creeping in, right? Even though you said 20 minutes, totally focused, the chances are you're still going to have some thoughts about that email or something else. Something else may jump into your head, something completely unrelated, something from your personal life that's not work-related. The solution here is to just pay attention to what that monkey is. And what I mean by pay attention is notice the monkey, notice that thought that's taking you away from the present moment, very non-judgmentally, so don't beat yourself up and say, damn it, why can't I focus today? Try to stay away from those blaming statements. So very non-judgmentally notice that thought, that monkey, and then return to your task. Yep, I caught myself. I was thinking about what I was going to do when I leave work today. Let me just put that to the side and get back. There's plenty of time to think about that. I'm going to get back in. I gave myself 20 minutes. I'm going to get this done. Okay? One of the things that is on the rise today is job burnout, and I could do a whole webinar just on burnout, but one of the key reasons why job burnout is so prevalent today is we, as leaders, we're the ones to blame for this. We believe that we need to crush as much work as we possibly can into the smallest amount of time. So, and technology has totally added to that. The ability to get a hold of somebody 24/7 has made that even worse. So to be emailing people in the evenings is very normal. To expect somebody, and this is very common, to work from 8 o'clock in the morning until noon, and you only allow them one 15-minute break kind of thing. What happens when you have to work that hard for that length of time? Well, you know what happens. We can't stay focused that long. We start, those monkeys see that as the world's greatest opportunity to distract us. So as a leader, one of the things that you can do, if we know that it's taking longer, and I've already shared the data with you about this, if we know that if we're not dealing with these distractions, these monkeys, that it takes us 25% longer to complete a task, what we need to do is to renourish ourselves. We only have a finite amount of energy every day, right? And if we deplete that energy by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we don't get anything done after that. We're completely useless. Have you ever done that? You get to, like, you know, it feels like kindergarten. You want to get your mat out and take a nap. That's because we're so exhausted from batting away these monkeys and not dealing with these monkeys. And it's taking longer to get stuff done, and we're just exhausted. My recommendation is don't ever go more than 90 minutes without taking a break. Now, the break can be whatever, you know, you can work that out for yourself or with your boss or whatever you want to do, but you should at least take a break every 90 minutes. I would even say at some point that, you know, you have a full hour, whether that's a lunch break or whatever, but a full hour of not working. It pays for itself. Just think in terms of that 25% of additional efficiency, of productivity, if you will, that you will get back because you're not giving the monkeys an opportunity to distract you. You're working hard for a period of time, and then you're taking a break, right? It doesn't give those monkeys enough time to get really revved up like they normally do. So please make sure that you figure out a way to renourish yourselves. I saw a piece on the news just last night that more and more companies are saying, telling their employees, do not respond to email after 5 o'clock. Who would have thought, right? We do this to ourselves. If somebody emails us and it's dinner time and we're sitting at the dinner table with our phones and getting messages, if we respond to that message, what does that say to the person who messaged us in the first place? That we're available after hours and that we're willing to respond. And so the next time that person has something that comes up that's after hours, they're going to say, well, Eric always responds to me. Let me send him a note. And it just continues to reinforce itself. If you have the ability to do this, to say no email after a certain amount of time, and some companies aren't able to necessarily jump into a culture like that all at once. You know, they need to start in the shallow end of the pool. Some of them have said, all right, no email after 5 o'clock, 1 day a week. Well, baby steps, right? That's better than nothing. You want to be able to get to the point where you have a culture whereby you're keeping your employees nourished, right? They want to come to work because they get things done. They're contributing to the overall goals of the organization. They don't wake up going, oh my God, another day of me not getting everything done that I need to get done, and my boss is going to think I'm a real slacker, and blah, blah, blah. All of those negative thoughts that keep coming into your mind. If you've got a place where the goals of the organization are based around making sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we can produce the best work possible, that makes a lot more sense. And a lot of companies are coming to that realization now, and it's way overdue, I would say. All right, other distractions, ways to manage our distractions. I already talked about email. Do the same thing with social media, right? Shut off Facebook, turn off, let your friends know you're not going to respond to personal phone calls or texts or anything except maybe during breaks. Let them know that, or don't even give them your work phone number. Set up alerts on your phone to make yourself take those breaks. If you're not good at that, right, you're one of those people, I know that I am. It's very easy for me to sit down and say, all right, I really need to knock this out. And I'll sit and work for 4 solid hours without taking a break. That's so not good, right? And so what I've started to do now is actually put on my calendar with a reminder that pops up on my laptop that says, take a break, right? Because otherwise I'd look at the clock and go, oh my God, it's 4 hours have gone by. And sure enough, I've probably been distracted 100 times in between and checking Facebook and, scores of a ball game or whatever that has made me less efficient. So manage your media, I guess, is what we're trying to say here. The part about renourishing, schedule your breaks so that you can clear your mind, right? And let me qualify this. So it doesn't do you any good from a burnout perspective that if you schedule yourself for a break every 90 minutes and you go and you say, oh, I'm going to do something healthy for myself, I'm going to go for a walk. If you go for a walk, and let's say you go with a colleague of yours at work, and all you do is talk about work, you've accomplished nothing. If anything, you've probably made it worse. There's nothing wrong with taking a walk with somebody, but maybe you guys have a rule that says, we're not going to talk about work while we walk, right? Make that about yourself. Make that about clearing your mind so that when you come back, those monkeys are pushed aside, and then they're not going to come back as quickly as they normally would. They'll come back, but maybe not as quickly and maybe not as strongly. I think I alluded to this earlier. To the extent that you can be transparent with other people about what you're trying to do, what your goal is, what your intent is, what your self-development goals are here. And tell them about monkey minds. Tell them that you did this webinar and that you're really trying to minimize distractions. As you start to put in solutions of your own, and I use that red flag in the cubicle thing as an example of that, let people know what you're trying to do. They'll want to help you. They want, especially your direct reports, if you're successful, they're probably going to feel better. They want you to succeed because then they're more likely to succeed, right? So let people know. And this may require stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit, but if you feel like you can, talk to your boss about this and be very transparent and say, listen, I have this opportunity to be better at my job, and the way I've decided I can do that is by minimizing my distractions. And here are some of the things that I'm going to do. And even involve your boss and say, listen, if you notice me doing X, Y, and Z, right, multitasking or replying to emails at 9 o'clock at night or whatever you can think of, call me on it. Say, you got to stop doing that. You're not helping yourself in your own personal development here. Okay. I mentioned Daniel Goleman earlier as the person who really started emotional intelligence. One of the, I guess you could call it a tool in the emotional intelligence toolbox, is self-analysis. And I'm not talking about needing an advanced degree in psychology in order to do this. I'm talking about being able to kind of step outside yourself and do an analysis of why these monkeys, why you've continued up until now to allow these monkeys to distract you. People don't do things unless there's some kind of benefit. All right, let's be honest about it. We do things because we hope that we're going to get something positive in return. Now, it may not always be conscious, but it's the truth. So ask yourself, What are the benefits? Let's take multitasking since it's the most egregious part of all of this. Why do I multitask? What benefits do I hope to derive from multitasking? One of them may be you honestly believed up until today that you were getting a lot more accomplished if you multitasked. More importantly, if you peel that onion a little bit more, you may find that if you're, again, really honest with yourself, that when you multitask, people look at you differently. They say, well, look at him, he's working so hard, he's got 1,000 things going on. He's a really busy guy. He's a really important person. And that feels kind of good, right? That feels good that people think that you're important and you're busy and you're smart and you're dedicated and you're loyal and all of those kinds of things that people will make up about you. And those may be true, but those are associated with the visual of somebody multitasking. If we know that multitasking, honestly, multitasking is the equivalent of before you leave to drive home from work, you stop at the bar and do a couple of tequila shots. You would never do, I hope, you would never do something like that, right? To get in traffic after you've done a couple shots. Multitasking is the same effect. You cannot do your best work when you're multitasking, but you're doing it for a reason. And so do a little self-analysis and be real honest with yourself about that. And ask yourself, so what can I do to replace the benefits of feeling positive about me? Or why is it important that other people perceive me as this busy, loyal, dedicated guy? How important is that to me? Am I going to just get that anyway by doing my work and doing it well? Maybe if I just improved the quality and the quantity of the work that I do by not multitasking and staying focused in the present moment, maybe I'll get those rewards, maybe I'll get more rewards than what I'm currently getting now, kind of under false pretenses, if you will. And also ask yourself, what's the worst? So maybe there's some fear involved in giving up some of these habits, like multitasking. And you say to yourself, well, I've kind of fooled myself into thinking I was getting a lot more work done. This guy Eric's telling me I'm not getting more work done, but I'm afraid to try this because I'm worried that it might not work. Well, ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen if you try it? What's the worst thing that can happen if you don't reply to your boss's email right away? Now, you can make a lot of stuff up about that, but at the end of the day, if you are able to frame your decisions about trying to disempower these monkeys and share with other people why you're doing this, people are going to support you. People are going to encourage you, actually, to step out of that comfort zone. And you won't have to worry about what may happen. And look at your stress. Look at your stress today compared to other people. And maybe everybody around you is in a very stressed environment, and there's just a lot to go around. Is there anything that you wouldn't do if you could reduce the amount of stress that you experienced every day? If that was within your grasp, if there was something that you could do, right? So part of being mindful is letting go of some of that ego attachment, right? So that we can be more compassionate towards ourselves and other people. So have that conversation with yourself, and we'll get better results. Speaking of results, let me give you a few because we're about to wrap up here. So what happens if you're able to implement some of these mindful solutions to working with your monkeys or these distracting thoughts? You're going to become better able to manage the biggest individual obstacle to focused thinking, which is your monkeys. The other result that you're going to get is you're going to be able to reduce the amount of time that your ego clings to or attaches to negative emotions. So you'll find that as you invite these monkeys in and have these conversations and then put them to the side, things that you worry about, you're going to find yourself either not worrying about them as much, or even you'll find yourself not worrying about as many things as you currently do. Things that if you spend a fair amount of time being wary of other people or other people's opinions, like I was mentioning earlier, as you practice some of these mindful skills, that's going to decrease. You're going to become less even paranoid of other people, less afraid of opening up to other people and getting outside your comfort zone. And as a result, you're going to become a more positive person. You're going to be someone who other people are drawn to, because now you are optimistic. You're more confident about being able to deal with these distractions that come about every day. You're going to be more positive about your work and what you do and the organizational goals and your role in achieving them. So that feels a lot better, right? When you're more positive about what's going on, people are going to want to model their behavior after you too. And that's really such a great outgrowth of practicing these mindful leadership skills. Is if you become a more positive and more optimistic person, people will actually come to you and say, so what's changed? You seem like a different person. Tell me what you've been doing, if you haven't already. Share with me some of the things that you've been working on, because you just seem like you're in a much better place now. And so these are great tools to share with your colleagues at work. The last result that I touched on this being an effect of the monkey mind, and obviously now it's going to be a result, is if you're getting your work done on time and efficiently and effectively because you're dealing with these monkeys in a more mindful manner, it's also going to allow you to fulfill your role as a leader in terms of being creative. It gives you time to be creative. The monkeys don't come swinging in as hard and as soon as they normally would. And so now you can be that person who brings new ideas to the table. You're not afraid to take risks in terms of offering up alternative ways of doing things. Those are the kinds of leaders that people really aspire to be and want to be around. Are those folks that are able to think more creatively. Okay, I promised you some follow-up questions to take back and kind of put some of what we've talked about today through your own personal lens. So here's the first one. When you pay attention to your monkey mind, is it primarily focused on events in the past or things to come in the future? So that very first basic thing that we talked about, labeling the monkeys as they come up. Is this and like I said, you can set times when you want to pay attention, or cues in your environment. When I walk through a door, I see the color red, or whatever it is. But as you start to label these things, these distractions as past or future, it's just a healthy practice to say, oh, you know, when I'm at work, I think a lot about the future. When I'm home, I think a lot about the past. And you can do some self-analysis about whatever you think that might mean. But just being aware of it. Remember, awareness is really part of the key in mindful leadership. If you are aware that those kinds of things, those are the monkeys that you're working with, you'll be more successful in that. What are some of the emotions that come out of those monkeys? So, for example, if you are a multitasker, what are some of the emotions that you feel when you multitask? When you worry about the future, what are some of the emotions that come to mind, like fear? When someone doesn't perform well, you know, the team was supposed to get certain things done for you by a certain time, and they didn't produce like they were supposed to. What are the emotions? Go back to that space between model and think about, so what are some of the manifestations that I'm feeling? What's my part in this? Am I going to yell? Am I going to slam doors? Am I going to whatever my manifestations are going to be in that moment, what can be some of my other responses, my more mindful, positive responses can be. Are you expected to multitask? Be honest with yourself. Are you expected to multitask or check email or messages after work? Or are you making that up? Did anybody say to you that you're supposed to check your email after you go home? Did anybody say to you, we expect you to juggle 27 things at once? If not, then why are you doing it? Now, especially since you know that it's not a healthy thing to do. And if it is an expectation, go back to that person that set the expectation and say, listen, I'm struggling with this because you know, on the one hand, you're telling me that it's important to have a work-life balance, and on the other hand, I'm getting emails in the middle of the night. Something's got to give here, and I can't let it be the work-life balance. So what can we work out here in terms of how soon do I need to respond to emails that I get from you after hours? Can they wait until I'm back in the office in the morning? Can we have an agreement to do that? So based on all of that, what changes are you going to make in your daily routine that's going to help you stay focused in the present moment? What are you going to do? And they can be little things like stopping interruptions when you're trying to get things done. Whatever you can do, making a list of your manifestations of different emotions. What are you going to do? Almost put together a self-development plan for yourself. What are you going to work on? How are you going to know when you have successfully accomplished that? Now, in terms of kind of more of a self-development piece, from a mindful perspective, one of the exercises, it's a very basic, actually, it's a meditation exercise. And I don't talk very much about meditation because a lot of times people can focus on that as what mindfulness is. And that's not what it is. What meditation is one of many, many tools that somebody can utilize in trying to be more mindful about the work that they're doing. One of the exercises, though, is for you to close your eyes and don't focus on anything except your breathing. And you will notice, as you just pay attention to your in-breath and your out-breath, how long can you do that before you, and so that's very present moment thinking, right? You're just thinking about breathing in and breathing out. How long does it take before other thoughts start to creep into your mind? You know, how long have I been doing this? What do I have to do when I'm finished doing this? I don't have time to do this, right? How long before your mind starts to drift off into something else? That kind of practice, to set a timer for maybe it's only 3 minutes to start, and paying attention to those monkeys as they creep into your mind while you're paying attention to your breathing, just notice that the monkeys are there and then let them go off and refocus, pay attention to your breathing. And then the next one will come in and you'll notice it and let it go. Just do that for 3 minutes. Set a timer for 3 minutes. And then, you know, once you feel like you're getting good at that, set it for 5 minutes. Lots of people do it for 20 minutes a day before they go to work. And they find that that's a good way to really make them more aware and more mindful as they go through the day. It's an exercise that you can try and see if that works for you. I think just as importantly is for you to track how your negative emotions manifest during past and future thinking, physically and behaviorally. Pay attention to what those are. Even, you know, if you're, you know, I made the suggestion of when you walk through a doorway, that's a moment where you pay attention to how you're feeling. Everybody carries their phone around with them. Maybe just make a quick note in your phone. I was thinking about something that's going to happen tonight. It was a negative emotion, and you know, this is how it's manifesting. I started to get anxious about it. I felt So I started to feel nervous and my hand started to shake or whatever it is. But just make notes of that. You'll be amazed as those start to accumulate, the kinds of patterns and trends that you start to notice. It makes it easier to kind of do some of that mindful awareness in the moment. Oh, here we go again. It's my old friend fear is coming up, and this is what I normally do when I'm afraid, and instead I'm going to choose to do this. To the point where you start doing it unconsciously. It's not a conscious process. You don't have to literally stop in the moment and write down how you're feeling. It just happens naturally. And people, you'll know because people will mention it to it. Well, you seem a lot less stressed than you used to. Is one of the comments that you'll get for sure. You don't seem to be bothered by stuff as much as you used to. I hope this has been helpful. Please remember that the goal of this is not to get rid of those monkeys. You can't do it. These thoughts are, no matter how mindful you think that you have become after incorporating these solutions into your everyday life, it doesn't mean that the monkeys just go away. The monkeys are always there. It's not about getting rid of those, but it is about how to manage them better when they show up as distracting thoughts in our everyday lives. It takes practice. Keep working at it. Keep going back and reminding yourself of some of the tools that I've given you today to help you become a more mindful leader. And I promise you that you will see not only a visible, marked improvement in the way you manage your stressors and your distractions throughout the course of the day, but you will become a role model for your colleagues at work. And it helps to build a new culture in the work environment that people want to work within. And the work seems much more manageable, and the focus can turn more towards the goals of the organization, which is what we want to do in the first place, as opposed to our own kind of manic individual personal goals. Good luck with everything. I hope it turns out for you. Please check out some of the other webinars that I've got available on our website. And I hope I get to have a chance to talk with you again real soon. Take good care.